So I'm going to call the meeting to order. We will start with the consent agenda. We have the previous minutes. And well, why don't I take it all together? We're going to do the previous minutes, and then the policy will have a second read, and the second read is on board member conflict of interest and selecting library material. The board member conflict of interest just outlines when a board member should recuse themselves. And then the selecting library materials goes through how the library was about to do materials. And I've noticed it's mostly in align with the what is it, National Library standards. So if there's any conversation, you can have that. If not, an emotion. There makes a motion. We have nobody online. So all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? So moved. Agenda preview and prioritization. Lynn, do you have anything that needs to move out of order other than a potential student issue at the end?
I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight. I do want to just say, Polly, I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. Okay. I think your prioritization, is that where we're at?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have anything to move around or prioritize. I do have an executive session under student that can wait until the end of the meeting.
Okay. If I talk this loud, can you hear me? Okay. So that brings us to the recognition of visitors. I don't see anybody online. So that brings us to the school spotlight, which is Enosburg High School. So Matt, take it away.
Yeah, so this year, I think after a number of years without having any kind of student government, in an effort to have more student voice and to model democracy in our own school, we had students come forward with a proposal to put student government together. They put together a sort of a constitution, they elected officers, and they are here tonight to talk with you about what they've done. So why don't you guys come up and you can introduce yourselves. Their advisors are also here. Social studies teacher Chad Paquette, assistant principal Heather Hawkins.
I'm Mercedes. I'm the vice president of student council.
And I'm Xander. I'm the president of the student council. And we're here to present what our student government here does and what we've accomplished so far. We click the button over. Oh, yeah, okay. All right,
This is just a picture of everybody in the group.
Got some pictures of us during discussions, sort of just candid photos, well, some candid photos, but no. Okay. All right, so basically in the past, student government was going through a transition from planning dances, spirit events, stuff like that, into a more formal student government. But then COVID-19 sort of shut it down for the past 2 years.
How we've tried to get this back to normal is we recognize that we wanted to bring back student government once again. We thought it was a useful thing to bring back. So our goal was to get a wider variety of voices from a more diverse population of students. This meant that we wouldn't be having like specific class officers from each group. We wouldn't have like one president from just overall grades. Yeah, so like what it says up here, we didn't want it to be like a popularity contest.
So where did the representatives come from?
So the representatives came from, oh yeah, the advisories. So each advisory has roughly 10 students, 10 or more usually. Some has a little less, but each advisory brings forth an officer. They elect someone to come into student government. And then, so we have a student government of about 21-ish around there. So each year, a new representative is elected. If you're elected 1 year, you cannot run the next year. And you can earn up to 25 hours community service out of the 40 that is required for graduation.
So representatives speak for their advisory groups. This means that, so there's 21 members, there's one person from each advisory. So throughout the week, we've done like questions based that we go to our advisories and we'll ask them about like, what do they want to see in changes? And we'll take that back to our, every single Wednesday we meet together with our student government, and we'll take that back to our main group and we'll talk about how we can use those problems and make a change with them. So basically overall, our whole entire school is getting a voice and we're just the voice of our advisory.
Some examples of the topics that we have focused on and asked our advisories to bring back to the group is any health and safety concerns that they may have, curriculum and homework issues, lunch flow, senior privileges, PLPs, stuff, issues with regarding that and how they can be improved or gotten rid of completely, something around those lines.
How it's going so far. So overall, in the first few sections, we kind of got together and we talked about what we wanted student government to look like. And we used that to talk about issues we thought there was. And we all had a voice. So far with technology, we put the cell phone policy into motion. And we talked to our advisors about that and see what they thought the problem was as well. Fundraising, we had a basket raffle of donations from local businesses to purchase bracelets for students. And they wanted the bracelets to be around sexual assault and awareness. So I believe it was at a basketball game. We had the raffle, and we just called local businesses and asked them to make donations for the baskets to be made. So we didn't really spend any money to make those baskets as well. And then with facilities, the problems we've seen with that was the lunch flow. And to fix that, we actually changed the way the schedule was. So seniors would benefit more from their senior privileges, because before it was like a weird setup with the schedule. So seniors were able to leave during AT, but then they had to come back for like 20 minutes of advisory and then they could leave again for lunch. So we switched it now. So it's AT and then we can go to lunch and then it's advisory. So we have a longer period of time we can be gone. And then bullying, harassment, that is actually our focus right now.
Our hope for the future is that we want to try and get a speaker for the school to come talk about like important issues with the money that we fundraised for like sexual assault, suicide prevention, stuff like that. We want to create a task force for bullying awareness as well, for students, staff, and parents who want to join. We want to continue to be a voice for the concerns of the student body. So we're continuing to ask our advisories health and safety concern questions, stuff like that. And we're actually trying to get the vending machines going again after they were canceled from COVID. Oh, that's it. All right. Thank you guys for your time.
Yeah, so why don't you guys hang out in case they have.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Whoops. Yeah, I don't know how this goes.
Yeah. That's impressive. That's great. That was all this year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. That's great. And so there was one question I had. It was around, well, like just talking about the advisors and like what's some of the problems. It seems to be like the number one thing that people have on the phone.
Well, it's the one that gets reported the most is they want the Duffy special removed from the lunch menu. But we don't really take that one.
But I thought it was.
Yeah, we don't take that one very seriously because we can't really change the lunch menu. What would the other one? The other one.
And my advisory is full of seniors, so their complaints was they hated coming back for advisory
right.
for 20 minutes and then having to leave again for lunch.
Mhm.
They wanted to be able to drive all the way to their house and just stay there until they had to come back for advisory. So we actually did resolve that problem. So there wasn't really anything else.
Yeah, cell phones were
I was
also.
gonna say, I thought that was.
Yeah, cell
Oh,
phones
yeah.
was another big one, but I think the seniors were more concerned about their privileges. But
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what the cell phone, we have a whole technology committee. We sort of split off into groups to tackle different things at the same time. So I'm not exactly sure what the proposal looks like, but I'm pretty sure a proposal was written. So cell phones are more like senior privileges where you can have a privilege to have the phone out,
Right.
but if you abuse it, you can get that privilege taken away, sort of thing.
Those like the different
So
offenses.
they created, yes,
Yeah.
the cell phone committee created a proposal that they're actually gonna present to the leadership.
EFHS leadership.
Next.
No.
Yeah, right.
You guys, oh, sorry.
Sorry, one other question. Under how it's going so far, I noticed you said you guys are working on bullying and harassment. That's your focus area right now. Understanding that you might not have delved too deeply into that. I'm interested to hear where you're going with that. Like, what are some of the asks and what's your approach?
One thing we're actually trying to do currently is we're trying to set up a like presentation for both parents and students, like an after school thing, maybe an auditorium, and like make was it like a slideshow type thing,
The presentations for staff and parents and kids.
more like an awareness thing about like what bullying harassment is and like when that's reported, how it's handled. Because I was just talking to her the other day about how like a lot of students say like, oh, I reported this and nothing's happening about it. When like in being in student government, we know that when we report something to the principal or vice principal, like they take that into action and things happen, but it's just like confidential, so we don't know about it, that. And I said it would be really helpful to like inform the parents of that, as well as the students, so they understand like they are being heard and it's making a difference.
I also like how, because you were talking about not being a popularity contest.
Yeah.
And then when you were talking about the advisories, I was like, well, how is it not a popularity contest in the advisories? But then you're saying like it has to change every year.
Mhm.
So you're constantly getting like different voices. I really like that idea.
Yeah, and we found in most advisories, it's mostly just no one else wanted to do it, so
Yeah.
someone was just sort of thrown out there.
Understand. Yeah, that follows government all the way up.
Yeah, I wasn't actually elected for my advisory, but the person who was quit, so
Yeah.
I sort of just got thrown out there, but
I think
Worked
that's
out.
how we all got on the board, actually. Well, thank you so much. That was-
Polly, could I just jump in before the students leave? I wish I could be there to see you in person. There are 2 points that I wanted to make. One, I applaud your effort to really increase the number of voices that get heard in student government and for bringing back some of the things that we have lost. The second point I just want to make is as you're working on the bullying and harassment piece, and I heard you say something about fundraising. I have some resources that I can offer you in terms of bringing someone in to help with that topic. So please reach out. Please reach out to me, and we can connect you to some of those financial resources.
all right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, good
Thank you
job.
guys.
Thank you guys for your time.
Okay, that brings us to Morgan.
Right. Lynn, I don't know if there are any conversations you want to have before we get into budgets. If not, I'm happy to. All right.
You may want to have the principal model conversation before we get into budget. I think when I'm looking at my agenda, I think that's the only piece that could have a potential budget impact. I don't think it would have a significant budget impact.
Okay,
Yeah, I don't know.
so do you want to do that now?
If you would like, do you want me to just do that section, Polly?
Yeah, why don't you do that section? Then we'll have Morgan do budget and then you'll do the rest of your agenda after.
Okay. Courtney, are you wanting me to share my screen? Or are you going to share? Okay. So I think you have to go back one.
Right?
Yeah. So at the last meeting, we talked about, first of all, how sad we were to learn that Mrs. Reynolds is going to be leaving Enosburg Middle School. She's done incredible work there, and her shoes are going to be large to refill. One of the things that the board tasked me with is coming up with all of the different potential leadership models that I could think of between that board meeting and now. So I came up with 4 potential options for us to consider as we move forward. And I'm just going to go over those 4, and then we can open it up to a board discussion, Polly. The first is structuring it more like a typical high school 612 model, where you'd have one principal responsible for the 612, but you would divide that up. You have right now you have a high school assistant principal. You could shift to a model where you have a middle school assistant principal or a middle school dean of students whose sole role would be in supporting that middle school. Another option would be to keep the model that we currently have. And one of the things that we have done with Rachel, and one of the reasons we're having this conversation is the middle school is our smallest school in the supervisory union. And there are pieces of the role that this leader doesn't need to do because it is a school within another school. So we've looked at, Rachel and I have had conversations over the years about desk audit and making sure that we're trying to make the roles and responsibilities as equitable as possible across all of our leadership models. So Rachel has taken on quite a bit at the high school over the years. So moving forward with the middle school principal, but then having that person play a large role in the high school supervision and evaluation piece. Right now, Rachel does a lot with the new teachers at the high school, in addition to her responsibilities at the middle school. We could explore things like more facilities or transportation responsibilities that we could look at there. Another model would be looking at, we have some alternative programs, and we have Flexible Pathways Academy that's also incredibly small, and we could potentially merge those to think about, do we have the middle school principal take on being kind of the lead for our alternative programs, which I actually think, since I've written this, Michelle Taberge may be on to another thought that's more favorable for her on that matter. But also taking on potentially leadership of the K-8 Flexible Pathways Academy. The other option could be a middle school teaching principal, so that the principal would have some teaching duties during the day, so that they could potentially teach things that have to be appropriately licensed, but they could be assigned to teach things like intervention or enrichment as well. And we've definitely seen that model in some of the smaller schools in the state of Vermont. So I wonder if there are other ideas that people have, or if the board wants to jump into a discussion.
How many total students in the middle school?
I do some shared supervision. Last year I did significant as well as and I currently also oversee
That one
of them, yes.
One of
It's the one that is housed in the village.
correct.
The other one is housed.
Yeah, it's not totally.
Yeah, PAPS program there. I support in the trail house primarily.
Okay.
But I primarily oversee the
Yeah.
response.
In this bill. So when you talk about lead principal for alternative programs, are you talking about kind of that vision of multiple programs in one space?
Well, this was some early thinking that I was doing, and I actually, as I was reading it to you, thought, oh boy, I should have had a conversation with Michelle Taberge before I presented this, because I think we may have moved on to another leadership model within her program team. So not necessarily a principal, but a coordinator that could be more in-house. So I'm not sure that the alternative program piece would be something I would include as a recommendation after all.
Yeah, that wasn't my favorite
It is difficult. It is difficult to know which one, because when the alternative programs partner with your students, such that they are unsuccessful in the way they're at classrooms. So when there is need to respond to that program, it's usually a very significant need that requires a lot of help. So they could really benefit from the structure that gives them.
And flexible pathways, how many total enrollment right now?
Struggling a little. FPA, is that what you're talking about?
Yes, FPA.
I think they're at around 20 kids K through 8. This would be separate from the high school piece. But we've also had discussions about looking at that not as a principalship, but as a coordination, someone that's looking at it K through 12, all of it. So these are just ideas and options to come up with that we could potentially put on to make this a full-time role, or more equitable role. It's already a full-time role.
How many, Lynn, this is okay, well, how many students are in the high school?
Matt, I'm going to need you to answer that one.
Right now, 277. We have a pretty small graduating class, and so it's likely to go up around maybe 15, 20. So it's a little below 300.
Usually our total count is just over 4.
And so if you were to transition to the leadership model where it was one principal for 6 through 12 with 2 assistants, what would that mean in terms of layout? I mean, would they all the students fall under one umbrella? I think my concern there is that that's a critical age group and they sort of need that intermediary time to prepare them for high school. So would we still maintain that boundary, or what would that look like?
So I'm thinking that you might have asked Matt that, and to be fair to Matt, we have not had any opportunity to really go in depth in terms of designing what a 6 through 12 model could look like. This was more of a brainstorm of how could we potentially restructure this position? What are some of those options that we would have? I think that no matter what we do, we need someone who is in charge of and totally responsible for the middle school. And it doesn't mean that we couldn't have one person above that person. If you go with that first model, I wouldn't want anything else assigned to the middle school dean or assistant principal. I'd really want them to be centered on supporting students and adults in that building, in that section of the building.
I mean, I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about, we're trying to move salaries in a competitive way for principals. And I feel like the numbers between the flexible pathways and the middle school, consolidating that would give us more power elsewhere. Does that make sense?
Because of the limited workforce, Polly.
Yeah, I mean, because you're talking about 100 kids and 2 principals, right? Like if you had a middle school principal and a principal for flexible pathways, that's 2 principals.
It's like 125-ish, but yeah.
125.
Yeah.
Well, you said
I think that would require, I've done a little bit of work with Gab on this. We've had some of these conversations, and Gab does way more than the principal role for the Flexible Pathways Academy. She's still really tied to the high school FPA and is responsible for all of the, or a lot of the, I don't know if I'm going to capture this well, but getting the kids connected to any of the virtual options that they're exploring. And she does a lot of mentoring with those students as well. So I do know that there's a lot more on her plate than that. So there would need to be, if we did that, there might need to be someone taking on those pieces at the high school level. So that might require a deeper look at what all is included in Gab's current position.
Okay, so I feel like there's a lot of unknowns for us to kind of make this. Am I
So
correct in that?
I don't want to truncate this conversation and we can certainly continue to have it.
Yeah.
Nothing that I see up there. I think that's the first time I've seen this. Nothing that I've seen up there is going to cause me to change anything.
Okay.
So I think you can continue to discuss and figure out what more information you need, but I don't think we are impressed.
Okay. Because I feel like that's, I mean, all of those pieces, like we can't have that conversation if you don't really know all the pieces that Gab does. I guess, you know, we have to have the conversation. I definitely don't, well, not definitely, I shouldn't say definitely. For me personally, thinking about the middle school having its own principal at this point, but they definitely need somebody. I don't believe it should be just morphed into the high school. Like they need somebody, as the crew was saying, like this is a group that definitely needs somebody. But what does that somebody look like? I don't know.
Somebody principal or someone that could potentially be an assistant principal or dean?
Well, it depends, right? So if it's not somebody like who can do two things at once, like the third option, if it's not that, then maybe it's a dean. Or a teaching principal, although I feel like a teaching principal, as much as I love that idea, I feel like that would be better.
It is, I actually done it.
Yeah.
In this role, so there have been years in the past when we've done without reading interventionist.
Yeah.
So I filled the gaps in script, and it does not work well. No, if there's an emergency during an intervention block, people are not getting intervention because
You're putting out fires.
So it is challenging in that it's very unpredictable and how it happens in schools. So sticking to an academic schedule, if possible, no. CBU does that with their house models where, but they have 4 with under 100
Right.
per pod, and then each of those teaches one academic with 2 other administrative positions and also a budget that's different. So it can be done, and our models do it. It's tough.
Yeah.
So I think Morgan's proposal was to shift to budget and then come back to this. I can get the list of what Gab's responsibilities are if you want me to before we come back to it. I just have it in my drive.
So hold on a second, Lynn. I think what we're saying is if Heather and Matt had more 100 but there could be a possibility that we have a principal, an assistant principal, and potentially for the middle school, an assistant principal, so somebody holds an administrative license or a dean of students. The dean of students does not need to hold it.
But they also wouldn't be able to do the professional learning unless they have a contract.
Well, I was going to say, like somebody like a coach or something could, right? You could have a professional leader. They could not suspend or do anything like that. They would do to actually sign out. But a dean of students could be kind of right. So that's that model. Is either another assistant principal or a dean of students. And then the second option is what we have right now. And then the third option is merging 2 programs together. And then the third option is the principal teacher classes. So having
Yeah, right. It's challenging.
Yeah. So I personally think it's discussed, but I personally need the 1 and 3. But we don't, sounds like we don't have to decide that. Does anybody else have that?
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards 3. I feel like it's so important to protect that transition between 6 and 9. So unless we can create a structure by which we go with one, but still there's that opportunity for them to be in their own bubble and transition out of the.
And I agree too, like the community that breaks in the middle school, I would definitely be protective of that. Like even your teacher community, your kid community, like I definitely, anything to protect that. But also seeing where we could potentially learn. Right, or do something.
Exactly, building that where that will is similar to what Rachel has had.
Does that help, Lynn?
You're gonna need to tell me what it is you're asking me to do because I'm really struggling. I'm so sorry. I can't hear very well.
That's okay. So, yeah, should we move our tables up?
We can,
Or can we slide down?
the tables up. I can't
Okay.
move my phone because I don't have another plug for it.
All right.
See?
So.
Again. Yeah. And I see.
And then
So, the leaning is kind of that creating some kind of system where the middle school is kind of impacted and separate. Right? So they're not absorbed in the high school. But is that feasible? So like, is that feasible to merge two programs? I don't know. Is it feasible to do that with an assistant principal or a dean?
Which option are you asking? Is it feasible, Polly?
The first and potentially the third. So we're feeling towards the third option. Anybody have a leaning in a different way?
I mean, the other piece you can think about, I think that what you really could be deciding on today is, are you wanting a separate middle school principal and then assigning me to task them with other duties and responsibilities to make it a more equitable division of responsibility? Or are you wanting to shift the model so that there's one principal for the building, but there are two separate kind of ecosystems and one AP that is just really charged with the middle school and another that's charged with the high school? So I think we could figure out the other duties piece. I think there are some bits of that we need more information on, but I think you probably want to decide tonight is, are you talking about a principal model, or are you talking about designing and doing a 6-12 model?
Can I just say, we have a 6-12 school and we have a middle school within our, I mean, it's totally separate. We have a total middle school wing. And I have a middle school team, my team meeting. I mean, I'm not saying that we don't ever have a 6-12 staff meeting, but most of my meetings are 6-8, and I design the task. And so I'm not saying, I just want to say, you could have a 6-12 school still with a middle school within the high school.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So when you're saying a principal with other duties, maybe. I mean, because the first model is you might just have an assistant principal or a team student for the middle school.
Yeah, I think, Lynn, what we were maybe getting hung up on is, and I think you clarified it a little bit, is just making sure that if we have a 6-12 model, that there's still a space for those students in grade 6-8 to have a separate a separate space to grow, develop, transition, and not be thrown into the large.
Mhm. Now that makes sense for the pieces that I heard you say, Akua. I think there would be no intention on my part to see like physically where the middle school is located change. I still would like to see it look like and feel like its own separate space. But in terms of the leadership piece of it, that is another option, another way to kind of divide those responsibilities.
Okay, so with that understanding, I think I'm okay with either option.
Yeah, one or three. I feel like.
Do you mind if, Lynn, do you mind if I chime in? This is Matt.
Shaylee, please.
No, go for it, please.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
What I want to say is I could imagine making any of these work in a way that would protect the autonomy of the middle school. If we went to a 6 to 12 organization, to me, it's really key that there is still a full-time point person for the middle school, because so that it would have, again, so it would have that autonomy. So I've been in 6 to 12 schools with all kinds of different configurations. And I think it's really important for the 6 to 8 to have a designated culture, ideally a point person. I know Richford Beth kind of does it all. And I do think that's possible. I guess my concern would be probably the same as yours, Akua, that I wouldn't want the middle school to kind of become an appendage onto the high school. So it would be really important to me, if we went that way, that there would be a person, who was coordinating the middle school. I do love the current model where we have a middle school principal, and I think it works really well. But I don't want to. I don't feel the need to bias you in one direction or another, because I feel like we could make any of these work pretty well. The only thing I would change is I'm totally happy doing facilities. I have a few different things I would want to hand off to if we did number 2, but nobody's really talking about number 2, so that's fine.
Thanks, Matt. And you know what, Lynn, I think I would like to hear, and you're muted in case you're talking, but I'd like to hear where you're leaning.
It's hard because there's always in these decisions, there's like your head decision and your heart decision, right? So I would love to be able to say we have all the adequate resources we need to be able to continue on with a 2 principal model in the middle high school. That would be what my heart would go to, but my head goes to thinking about equity and thinking about the limited human resources we have in terms of leadership and the number of students in each of those schools. So when we add up, tell me your number again, Matt. 270, 278?
78-ish right now, yep.
Okay, and Rachel, you're right around 90 something or 100?
Yeah, 98.
Okay, so 360-ish? Just did that math wrong. 100.
Usually hitting about
380.
It's a little bit low right now because we have a real, whatever the outcome is, we have a real dip in the juniors and seniors. But our normal class sizes are 75 to 90, I think, in the high school. And we're anticipating next year's freshman class to return to that more normal level. So I would imagine 400 soon.
Yeah, I think that there are too many kids to just say we're going to do a principal and 1 assistant principal and they're going to have the full 6 through 12. I think that would do exactly what Akua would be worried about, where they would get meshed in with the high school and we wouldn't have that separate autonomy for the middle school. The head part of this decision for me is that we should explore the 6 through 12 model a little more and think about whether or not that's something that could be viable. I think that's similar to what we're doing in Richford. It would be more equitable, and I think one of the things we're struggling with is the human resources around hiring administrators. So I think that, if we went with the dean of students model, there are some benefits to that. We could get some teacher leaders in the mix of considering moving up in the ranks of, that's a step that they could be at. We also could get people that have an administrator's endorsement. Maybe we would have that be an assistant principal role. And that could be an opportunity for us to be building capacity in people for down the road. So I think, if we had unlimited resources financially and human resources, then I think that, adding on additional duties and responsibilities to the middle school principal would be great. But I don't think that's our reality. I don't think it's going to get better. I think it's actually going to get more complex. And as we try to hire principals for other buildings, I think it's going to get harder. I don't know if that's helpful or not, Akua.
Very helpful.
Rachel, if you look at these 4 plans from your experience, if you had to choose one of these 4, which do you think would be most successful?
It's a tough question because it's emotional in a lot of ways to hear a role that I've been so passionate about debated.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, yeah, I really thought of that.
Sorry. So I understand the reality. And I know how much I do to make sure everybody's. I come at it with mixed feelings.
Right.
Which I only heard a piece of that, and I think I heard enough to know that this is a painful conversation to have, and I should have begun with this. This recommendation has nothing to do with the value that I see in the work that you've done in the middle school. You have been an incredibly hardworking principal, and have done really good things to move us forward there. So I hope you're not walking away with this being anything other than us having to have a viable solution for us moving forward in kind of a different time than we're in now than we were when we filled the position when you were hired.
Lynn, she's not in the room.
Oh,
Okay,
oops.
so why don't we check that out, look at your options, and let's continue with budget. Okay. Morgan.
Okay, so everything other than the budget was informational, so according to that slideshow that you've seen before. I'll try to blow through this kind of quickly. So we are here January 10th. Hopefully we will finalize the budget and sign the warning tonight. Board petitions are due on January 30th. Mort and Akua have seats that are up. And I know Mort is already gathering signatures. Akua, I'll get you the documents that you need to do that. We've got the posting dates there. The annual meeting is February 23rd for ER. That will be here. And I'm assuming it'll be at 7 o'clock, which is kind of when we've already had it. That's one that we switch back and forth between Richmond High School and Enosburg High School.
Yeah.
Enosburg is auditors.
And how many signatures?
30
signatures.
is the minimum. And that can be signatures from either Enosburg or Richmond. Okay, next one. We've gone over the budget objectives. I'll go through a lot of these quickly. My assumption is, Holly, when you and I sit down and come up with the presentation for the public, we'll sort of base it off of this. So you may want some version of the objectives on the next one. Additional considerations, you've seen all of these, except for we saw a small decline in equalized pupils. As equalized pupils go down, your tax rate goes up, although that's a pretty small, small change. Enrollment projections, we may use that or not. Everything through 2022 is actual. You've seen most of these. The only one that I added to this was the Sugar Shack and the discussion we had about kind of converting that on payment to a time construction fund. Sugar Shack, and we'll talk about that later. These are probably not quite up to date. I did a little bit of tweaking since you saw the budget last night. The only major change in staffing since the version you saw was the addition of 0.6 FTE at Enosburg Elementary to bring a teacher up to full-time.
Okay,
As a potential consideration.
but that's still down.
Well, it's down,
Okay.
and in part, it's because we've moved all those parent educators to the supervisory meeting. So to kind of give you the big picture, Enosburg Elementary, we've got a new interventionist position, and then that part of an art teacher. There is some movement from Enosburg High School to Enosburg Elementary School for some tech support, but not a new position. Those are already in your budget. And then Enosburg Elementary has dropped funding an NCSS position in school-based behavior concerns. At the high school, we've got a new global citizenship position full-time, and then an additional half-time PE teacher. At the middle school, there's been an interventionist position that's been kind of on and off over the last few years at 0.7. Put back in the budget. They're also down an NCSS position. At Richford Elementary, there's an additional counselor, and then catching up on a half-time counselor position, which we hired last year but didn't have in the budget. Also a half-time assistant principal. The other half of that position being paid out of grants. There's a little bit of shift in custodial and tech between the elementary school and the high school. And then they've also dropped a school-based clinician from NCSS. And a lot of those are, I think, just the recognition that we are unable to fill them. At Richford High School, there's really not too much change. We're calling the athletic director full-time now. They'd always been carried in the budget as a 2, and we kind of equalized that when we went into hiring season last year. An additional 1.0 custodian, and then a little bit of pieces and parts of people who were shared from the CFP coming more into their general fund budget. No change at Cold Hollow, and then there's a full-time theater arts teacher that would be new to your budget that would be shared with the 2 schools. If I've missed anybody, you can chime in. I think those are the big ones. These we'll use in the presentation to your public. The blue 3/4 is basically the cost of your people. So it's just showing you that most of the budget is in your personnel. The big pink wedge is other services, much of that is the SU assessment. So that's your special ed teachers, food service, and transportation make up the bulk of that. And then that green wedge, which is only 5% of the pie, is your utilities, which have been going up pretty consistently, and then all of the stuff that we buy, kids and teachers. This is the same data, slightly different representation. NNB wanted to see it this way. While either I can talk about what makes the most sense when we get to really drilling in the presentation. I think it's a little harder to understand, but it does kind of show changes from where we are.
When you think it's happening?
I think the graphs are nice, easier to see the relation between the pieces. Yep. Same budget split out a different way. The green half is instruction, so it's primarily direct instruction and special ed. The blue almost half is support, so that's both supporting students and supporting staff. Your administration comes in there, assessment from central office and the plants. And then the red slice is really that other catch-all. So that's primarily the sugar shack, and it will be a very tiny fraction for some other bits and bits. So the latest version of the budget, which you haven't seen yet, but I will show you, it tracks pretty close to what I sent last night. This for Shelley and Kua is kind of how the state walks through setting a residential tax rate. So the first thing they look at is budget instances, and the budget that you have, or that I have in front of me, is 21.4 million, up 1.2 million. Go to the next slide. Okay, go to forward. Sorry. Didn't go one more. Over. Another one. From the expenses we've put your local and grant revenue. This is primarily tuition payments received by the two high schools in the tech center. There's also a chunk of money that comes in directly from the state to support the tech center. And then there's some minor bits and pieces which we can go over later. Right now, I'm projecting that your revenue is also up. We will need to have a discussion about the money that was left over in 2022 and how much of that you apply to buying down your tax rate as opposed to other things that you can propose to your voters. Okay. So the difference of that is ed spending. And so assuming those numbers, your education spending is up about $1 million. You divide that number by the equalized pupil count. As I mentioned, you lost a few equalized pupils. So increase in ed spending and the decrease in equalized pupils both will serve to push up your tax rate. And dividing one into the other gets you ed spending per pupil amount. And this is the number that the state likes to use to compare districts to each other across the state. So in this case, if this budget were warned as presented, your ed spending per pupil would go up about $1,300. On your warning, there will be an article that reads this way. So you're asking the voters to approve the amount you said you're going to spend. And then statute requires you to tell them what the spending per equalized pupil is and whether that spending is going up or down. We do not have data for that comparison, but one of the things that we've been doing for the last 5 to 10 years is showing for the prior year where each of our districts is in relationship to the rest of the state. We're pretty consistently in the bottom quarter, if not the bottom 10% in terms of the people spending. I hope to have that data soon. But it's not. The ed spending is then divided by the dollar yield. I talked to you about this number in December. This is a number that is set by the tax commissioner, and it is basically how much money is raised for $1 on the tax rate. So for a tax rate of $1, you, the district, would get $15,479 per pupil. This number, when it goes up, drives the tax rate down. This is a pretty big jump from last year. Primarily, it's due to the health of the different funding streams that support the ed fund. So this is the brightest spot in terms of the tax rate moves this year. That will be set, that will be finalized in May or June by the legislature. Last year, we were tipped that the legislature was looking to take money from one of the funds to support universal meals. They're going to fund that first year. We've not heard anything this year, so I think everybody across the state is planning to warn the 15,479 people, and we're going to try to get something. So dividing that gets you the equalized residential school tax rate. So last year's rate, once it was all final, was just under $1.26. If you warned this budget tonight and this data all held true, you would be warning a tax rate of just over $1.17. So almost a 9-cent drop. So that's all happy news. The CLA, however, which is the last part of the calculation, has dropped precipitously across all towns in the state. Enosburg-Richford has actually not dropped as much as the 4 NMD towns. But as the CLA drops, that drives up the tax rates as they appear on your residential bill. So in this case, Enosburg's dropped 7%, Richford's dropped 6%. So that 8.8 cent drop in terms of the tax rate that you control would actually compute to a 1.1 cent increase on Enosburg residential tax bills and a 1.4 cent decrease on Richford residential tax bills. The CLA numbers are solid, they won't change. The equalized pupils are relatively close to final. They may drift a little in one direction or the other, but they're pretty close. The two that are up in the air, the yields could be changed by the legislature. And then you guys will decide the ed spending per pupil. Hopefully tonight. Okay, so this will show the tax rates basically since we were a unified system. So that black line is the Enosburg-Richford rate before any CLAs are applied. So you can see for 2 years it drifted upwards. It dropped in FY23. I don't know if it's been updated since I plugged in the yield, but the important message here is kind of how the town rates are traveling differently. So they're going to drop where ERU's rate is likely going to drop on this chart based on what you warned tonight. The other two are going to stay relatively flat because of that CLA. So I think that's all the boring stuff. This is a quick walkthrough on the warning. You will elect moderator, a clerk, and a treasurer from the floor. Everything else is informational at that meeting. And then the next articles will be voted on by ballot, town meeting day. We need to ask first. Currently Pat Hayes is moderator and Joe is clerk. I've not heard anything from either of them. And then Fran Jackson is your treasurer. Article 5 we talked about. This is the budget article. Article 6 will be on there. This gives you authority to borrow money while we wait for state aid to come in. Though your lawyers want this to be on there, we've also been told that if it fails, you're still allowed to borrow money, but they say leave it on, so we do that. So Article 7 was an article you put in last year. We were still kind of in the COVID concern when we were warning things then. And this was basically giving you permission to use that fund balance when it came in, if you needed to keep the schools operating. I would not suggest that you need this article, but you do have about $145,000 that is left over from FY22. In the past, you had taken a chunk of that and gone to the voters and asked them to put that in a capital reserve fund. The advantage of that, when you see big swings in the amount of money left over, is that those swings come in as revenue, and so they can really spike or lower your per pupil cost, which does the same thing to your tax rate. And so it's one of the tools you have to kind of even out that tax rate increase or decrease going forward. The other reason to do that, obviously, is that we got a lot of money in the physical plant in 5 campuses. And so tucking money away into a reserve fund is always a good idea. Article 8, this is different from what I shared with you because it is updated from the purchase we made in Richford last year. And I'm going to kick this over to Nate and let you talk about it because you know the.
Yeah, so 2 things. One, there was on the agenda, on my agenda, there was a piece of property that was on School Street that I heard came up for sale, but that was under deposit before it was even acted on. So that was before I did some digging, but I didn't get my agenda. This piece is this piece of land is part of David Killian's land. They used to do the parent project, parent property.
Yeah.
So we've been in talks about them willing to sell a portion of their land for us to turn into parking. At first, I was like, well, it doesn't make sense. And if I could show it, spot to my little speak this a little more. So part of our DRB review plan for Sugar House is to put more parking spots. And we have space for that at the end of our building where we put 10 more parking spots. However, it's not necessarily convenient. And if we continue to pursue the construction building, that could necessitate the need for more parking. A while ago, I didn't think the strip of land and 10 parking spots would be needed, but it may be now. So I don't know if another building there would require more. I don't know if you can fix that. You probably don't know because you're not acting on the board, but if we build another building there, we might need more parking. So this is to I've been talking with Intellian, they would be willing to sell the back part of their land to us, and we'd have to put up a fence eventually, but that could be future parking.
And this is the same script we had talked about prior.
So the money for this could come out of your property acquisition fund, which is a reserve fund of about 70,000.
Yeah.
Generally, with capital reserve projects, we like to kind of look at the end of the year and see if we've got a lot of money left over, either because we had more tuition kids coming into the 2 high schools, or we weren't able to spend money the way we were, and so potentially we could take it out of the general fund for the states, but it wouldn't necessarily need to impact any of the figures that you're proposing next year.
Was that property acquisition fund? It's been in there for-
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, it's up to you guys to decide whether you want to invest that and purchase that. Or
So as far as the property acquisition fund for people who work here, it was an article on the ballot that we moved money. I think it was surplus money into a property acquisition fund just to hold in case things like this came up where we could potentially buy property. If it would be. So the money is sitting there. We want to have to come up with it. And you were saying that it has 70 now. Okay. So, yeah, I'm.
So we'll include that on your warning. Again, that's a completely separate decision by the voters. And so I think in your discussions with voters, you want to make that clear that they've got it in their bonnet about not wanting to school dividing the property. It doesn't mean that they have to vote on the general budget.
Okay,
You vote yes or no.
okay, so they can, that'll be a separate box, yes, no.
Yep.
Okay, got you. Okay,
Yeah, in order to spend that, you have to ask the voters.
You have to ask the voters if you want to buy. It doesn't have, the money is under your jurisdiction now, as long as it's for property acquisition. But even if you weren't using that money, you'd have to ask permission to buy real estate. And we asked if we could get away with property line adjustment.
Yeah.
And what was nice.
you still need to add.
And then the polling locations, I haven't figures in yet. I've got it here.
They're trying really hard.
Richford Town Hall, 10 to 7. And I haven't heard back from Billy Joe yet, but I believe it's still gonna be at Emergency Services Building.
They're trying to get the armory ready.
But. It might still be.
So, okay,
I
annual, town meeting day is March.
Whole party. And we're gonna go there.
Let's just share that PDF next.
Yeah.
Courtney's gonna pull up the latest version of the recap that was sent out. Okay. So again, this is the 10,000 foot view of the budget, which I did send to you in the 30-page detail. This is broken down really just by the big picture functions that we do in the school. So that instruction half of the budget, which I showed you on one of the pie charts, is the first 11.8 million. Direct instruction is what we call general education. Special ed is special ed. Vocational instruction is the part of Nate's budget that's specific towards teaching kids. Athletics, co-curricular, adult ed are all fairly self-explanatory. The big changes in direct instruction and special education are largely because when we went to warn the budget last year, we were trying to get ahead of Act 173. And so we basically classified all our paraeducators as direct,
Right.
non-special ed, because we didn't think we were going to be able to count them. We're kind of backtracking from that, and the real number will be different, I'm sure, because we're still trying to navigate the rules there, but we thought it was more accurate to bring a chunk of that back into special ed. Under support services, student support is guidance and health. Instructional support is PD, library, and technology. General administration is U4. School administration is kind of the traditional principal office. Central services is what you get from the SU. Buildings and grounds, and then transportation is the chunk of transportation that you pay for yourself. So it's primarily going to be sporting and events.
And just for transparency, you say general administration, that's for like that amount of money pays for like conferences, or like why is that?
It is largely insurances that we pay
Oh, okay.
at the district level.
Okay.
So we pay that over you. The legal budget is in there.
Oh,
Your at board salaries are
yeah.
in there.
I just, that's why I said for clarity's sake, because that looks like we could get it that worked out. But we don't. Okay.
And so, in terms of increases and changes here, I talked a little bit about increasing the guidance being spent at Richford Elementary. What I had seen digging into both student support and somewhat on buildings and grounds is I think we've had a shift in staff where we probably had somebody that was not taking insurance because they were getting it from their spouse who either has come on your insurance or is replaced someone who's come onto your insurance. So, each of those swings is about 25,000 potentially. So there were a few pockets of that. The school administration increase is largely due to catching up to some of the salary increases that we made last year after the budget was warned, which me and Sarah remember those. Buildings and grounds are primarily insurance and salaries. We do have an additional custodian in there. And we're seeing a lot of increases in utility costs. Section below that, facilities acquisition and construction, that 400,000 is the amount we talked about last month for the Sugar Shack. And then below that, you can see kind of the offsetting 446,000 drop, which is the retirement of that bond as well as reduced interest payments. So I'll pause there and try to answer any questions on the expense side. So on the revenue side, again, local revenue is primarily tuition. I'm anticipating this roughly the same number of tuition kids at the two high schools. I think we're going to see an increase in the tech center number of kids at the tech center. So that's up a little bit. Other restricted revenue is alcohol, tobacco awareness grant that we get comes into your district. And I anticipate we'll get again. State revenue is primarily money coming into the tech center. There are a few other small grants for driver's ed. We get some money for getting kids through driver's ed. We get some high school completion grants, but primarily it's tech center. Federal revenue is money we get to support the JROTC program. So we basically get half of the salary comes back to you from the Army. And then other revenue is the use of the fund balance. So at the end of 2021, we ended the year with $30,000 in the bank. So a lot closer than we like to end it, but we're on the right side of it. So that 30,000, we did not ask the voters to do anything with it. So that full 30,000 is going to go back into lowering your tax rate. We don't have an audited figure yet, but I think we're going to be at about 145,000 at the end of FY22.
Okay.
So your options are to You could put it all into other revenue. Revenue goes up and spending goes down, tax rate goes down. You can take a chunk of it and put that into capital reserve and a chunk and put it into this other revenue. The voters get to tell you yes or no on whether it's going into capital reserve. If you were to propose that and they were to vote it down, you would just have extra money in your bank account. And so you probably have a higher surplus. That's fair. You could put it all in capital reserve. And so before we set your warning, I kind of need to know what direction you want to go with it. You've got $500,000 in, which you put in 2 years ago, I believe. Don't believe we've touched it yet. We've done a lot of capital projects this year. And so if we get to the end of the year and it's, we're at a point where it says, oh, we're going to be $100,000 in deficit, we'll certainly have $100,000 in capital projects and we'll see if we can put those in capital. Sorry.
So we haven't tapped into the capital reserve
Not yet.
even when they crack.
We haven't yet. In the general fund, but we know we've got that option.
So one more time, the $500,000 plus the 30,000, right? All of that is now sitting where?
$500,000 is sitting in a capital reserve account, so it's an account that doesn't disappear from year to year. It's one where we, the principals and I will come to you and say, we want to replace the boiler at school X and we want to use capital reserves for that. And then you guys make a motion to allow us to pull that out. Generally, what we've done is we said, we are having a parking lot at Richford High School. We want the ability to use capital reserves. And if we can get through the budget year and not need it, we will take that. And that'll continue to see.
So we don't have to vote on that. That's basically for you to tap in.
Once it goes into capital reserves, you guys are the vote that matters.
Okay. And so is the recommendation for this additional funds for that to go there?
I think that when you have a surplus and like the idea of consistently putting out to voters, you're socking money away into capital reserve. I think it's prudent fiscally, but it also, if you, we had a very tight year last year, so we didn't do it. I don't like going too many years without that because then it's something new to them. It's just, so I like putting some of it away. I honestly don't know that it really matters too much whether it's, you put 45,000 in and leave the 100 here, or reverse those, or split it 50-50 and say we're going to split it 50-50.
And capital reserve for the child care center, we're not talking like that.
You could, we don't have anything to buy to put a child care center in, so it would certainly be an allowable use, but I don't think there are any stated plans on then using it for sugar shack as a revolving fund.
How much money, would it take to drop the tax rate by a penny? How much revenue?
We've done this
It's usually around 50,000.
I was hoping to get Enosburg to not go up at all.
And
Not that it's my decision,
No,
but I just thought.
And my inkling was to like do the comment, like give back the 45 and put 100 in that.
So to buy a penny,
Yeah.
you need to move roughly 143,000.
It was 50 when we were not purged because it was half the project. But yeah, that's fine.
You've been doing very Montgomery.
Ben,
I know.
some of us have been here a long time. So
It's issue with
Like,
it.
last
Much
time.
we graduated.
it's true.
That's why I wanted to know how much.
And the appraisal.
To drop, they just turned down.
So,
Well, it would ultimately drop.
so that is what it takes to move. You could get there by cutting 143,000 or coming up with 143,000 on revenue. That's your goal. Or a mix of the two. Not that I'm recommending it, but in the past, you guys have said we think we're gonna get more tuition kids than
Oh,
you think.
I knew.
Put in more money for tuition.
Right.
I really felt that.
Morgan, I'm not sure if you've already said this or not, but have you talked a little bit about the context at the state level about the predicted, the projections for budget increases across the state? Like I know I wish we could be flat on that Enosburg residential tax rate. I want to bring us back to the line above that shows like the impact that we have pre-CLA. That is a pretty significant decrease. I think everybody across the state, or most people, are really contending with the CLA impact and are going to be putting forward some big budget increases or big tax rate increases.
So in terms of your expense budget, what I have in front of me is 6.2% up. I think what I'm hearing is it's going to be statewide about 8% up on average.
So you're saying if we're 6% or under,
I
then
think you're increasing slower than what I'm hearing most people. Obviously, people haven't really started awarding budgets yet,
right?
So that could change when their board's going to hold it. But Lynn, you can talk about what you're hearing from Champlain Valley people, and that's really what drives the state, because that's where most of the kids are.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't met in a month, but I think people were looking at some pretty significant increases, and there was definitely chatter about how much of a swing the CLA has had on tax rates across the board. So I think that there's some communication we can do around this. I mean, I know 6.2, I think you said, Morgan, percent isn't, we wish it wasn't that, but at the same time, we're bringing in a budget, even with the CLA increase, that it's going up a penny in Enosburg and down a penny in Richford. I think across the state, you're going to see significantly higher impacts than what we're producing or proposing.
Is there anybody feeling that we should put it all in capital? Or some in capital? And I agree with them. 45 and then put some in capital reserve.
So I'm sorry for the question, but I just want to clarify one more time. So if we do not put it in capital reserve, 130,000. The number, right? 145. So if we don't put it in capital reserve, the other options are.
So if you don't put it in capital reserve, I'm going to increase that 100,000 to 145, and that will take your tax rate down by about a third of the penny rate.
In your taxes. Okay.
Before I lose it, one of the pieces that I don't have an answer to yet, I'm assuming that we're going to get $1 million in for tech center tuition. That's based on a tuition rate of $14,750. That is not taking into account that 400,000. So how about that? So we have to set a tuition rate for the tech center. And basically, we take.
So we're not.
You pay and take in about half of it.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, yeah, let me get to that. So
Okay.
we take eligible expenses for the tech center, the number of kids we think the tech center is going to have, and we say, okay, we think the tuition rate is going to be X. And right now I've got 14,750. I say, okay, well, we know that you're going to bill out for this many kids. So you're going to have X dollars coming in as revenue. My 14,750 does not include the 400,000 for that project, because I'm not confident we're allowed to. We might be allowed to. So if that's the case, then Nate's tuition rate wouldn't be 14,750 at the end of the day. It would be significantly higher.
Right, because you'd be paying for that project.
And it's a bit of a game. Because, yeah. So, and then to answer your question, we do, because of the way the state deals with tech centers, roughly half of NATE's kids come from either Enosburg or Richford. So I say that we're gonna bill out $1 million. We actually have to send ourselves a bill for $500,000, and then we get $500,000 in revenue from the state. So that's in your budget on both sides of it, so it doesn't impact your tax rate. But if we start jacking up the anticipated rate for NATE's tech center program, I then have to go back in and increase your expenses, because we're gonna increase.
Yeah.
If we increase your revenue by 200,000, and we increase your expenses by 100,000. I wish I could make it make sense, but it doesn't.
Yeah. It's like. Okay.
So two other questions from me.
Yeah.
So the way you have it represented here, less $1 or a cent for Enosburg, minus $1 for Richford, is that socialized in terms of when we submit it as a tax rate, or is it going to stay separate? Those amounts. It stays separate.
Those stay separate. So the district sets a tax rate, and that's the same for everyone. And it's divided by the CLA, which is measured by the state on a town level. And so what the CLA is basically doing is to try to figure out what the difference between market reality and real estate and then what the listers have in the grant list. And so because properties have been selling a lot higher than they have in the past, the state knows, and this is for every town, the CLA is dropping because my property, which hasn't been assessed in Montgomery in 10 years, probably is going to sell for a lot more than 10 years ago when I assessed it. And so they're trying to town by town figure out what that is. And so I think you're seeing towns like Chittenden County where things go up faster, their CLA is dropping faster.
And so whatever amount we select, say it's the 45,000,
Yeah,
say it's
whatever.
50, et cetera, are we able to allocate that to, or let's say they're the ones, or it's gonna be split.
It's going to change your district-wide rate, and it's still just
And,
carries by the CLA.
okay, yeah, okay. And you said 45 to go into capital?
I was saying 45 to go back into, to lower the tax rate, and then 100 in the capital.
So that's the opposite of what's up on the screen. I've got 100 going into tax rate, 45.
Then how do you say that? Yeah, I was gonna
But
say.
that was arbitrary.
I know it was arbitrary. You were
Right, I'm leaning towards more aggressive on the tax rate, so I was
Yeah.
thinking maybe to do it. You know,
well, I've also, that's why, did you see the shock in my face when I was like, we need to have tax into because we have like a big project.
yeah.
And if you're talking about buildings, and then we've all put it to the general fund. Wow. So there may be a point where we put it to the general fund without trying to go split people like our savings account for big projects. And we have to hold them.
Or surprise,
Or like surprise, like
like things you don't
DCVs.
want. Right. You don't want to do, but you have to. You know,
Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to put it all towards the tax rate, but thinking about that things may come up, right? Thinking 50, you have to back. The tax rate.
I'm okay.
All right.
You can just hop in and check and make sure you haven't say anything.
So can I just clarify where you're at in your thinking now, how much you're putting towards tax rate and how much towards capital reserve?
Yeah, so when I did
Yes.
last year.
Lynn, that's correct.
So it's gonna go down. It'll be going down. And it's, yeah, Richford State or Enosburg.
So Morgan, just to clarify what you said, I think I heard you, my hearing's not the best. I think you said that there's $145,000 left over and you put $100,000, which is under other revenue up there?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you, in this, you were guessing they were gonna do 100,000 here and 45 into the capital reserve, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That was helpful. I can hear Beth very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So 50-50, yeah.
So 50-50 would be 70. Call it 70 or 75. Like, what do you want to? Which do you want to buy down more taxes or suck away more money?
Well, I kind of want to, considering we're already sitting in a pretty spot with the tax rate and we're about to go lower by a little. I kind of want to talk it away just because of, like, they have, yeah, like, there's so many projects. Like, I know, just know, even the loan is gonna be like, that's why I would favor. Because I know there's so many things that we've talked about, like potential projects and things that we've asked them to look into, and all of the buildings and all that stuff. There's a lot of money, and so if we have the money to put away, instead of like needing to borrow in the future, or then just raising the tax rate next year, like we're gonna do it this year, do it next year. It's right. We have it, we're not doing it, but 50-50 also is 50-50. So, and we already have a 500,000. If we had been tapping into that, I wish I was like, more, but right, 500,000 is pretty safe. You're answering all my questions, so. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? And I think I'm gonna let Lynn take over for a while while I make those changes and get your warning a little clearer. And then
Okay.
you can come back to me with the motions.
Okay, that brings us to Lynn.
I'll just share my screen.
Lynn, or did you hear me? You're up. Oh, you did, okay.
I had too many windows open. I couldn't get back to the original one. I was trying to follow along.
Or not.
That was my searching face, Polly. So I'll jump into my personnel report. So I think Courtney has it up on the screen. I'm not going to read through it with you. There are a couple of things that do require your action under notification of resignations. At Richford High School, unfortunately, we've had 2 staff members indicate that they're not going to be returning for the next school year, and that's Emma Hardy and Amber Ross. I think Beth has forwarded you both of those kind of heartfelt letters of resignation for your review. So I've been asking the board to make a motion to approve resignations of Emma Hardy and Amber Ross.
We have a motion. Sarah makes the motion. All in favor, say aye.
So next up, you see that there are positions, and you're seeing that some are now and some are next year positions. So we're going to keep that updated so that you have current understanding of what our hiring process is looking like. I know several of our principals are already in the process of looking for replacements for the 23-24 school year for the known positions that we know we're going to have. So hopefully by next month, I'll be able to bring you some professional hiring for approval. Next, Courtney. So we're going to do that at the very end. So this is the month each year that we talk about Act 129, which is Vermont's Universal High School Choice law. And each year you need to set limits for universal high school choice. So there are 2 numbers that you need to think about. And because we seem to struggle with this each year, I've spelled it out here so that we can look at it. So we need to figure out The annual limit for the number of students that are allowed to transfer out of each high school. The minimum limit is not fewer than 5% of the resident students or 10, whichever is less. Last year, you chose to set a limit of 7 students transferring out of each high school annually, which at that time met that criteria, because again, it's not total population, it's resident students. The second number that you're going to have to figure out is the board is going to be asked to set a limit for the number of students allowed to transfer into each high school. And you can set that criteria yourself. What you have set in the past has been, last year was set a limit of 20 students, 5 per year at each high school annually. And for those of you that are new to the board, this is something that happens between high schools as space is allowed. Students that don't have high school choice, so this would be specific to Enosburg and Richford students. They don't have the benefit of high school choice that the NMV students do. So they would be able to exercise that option through this 129 provision. And if there is room in the school, they meet the criteria, they're allowed to go in. What we need to understand as a board is as we're receiving these students, the home community counts the student. The money doesn't follow the students with this agreement. So just to make sure that was clear. So a number we're allowing in and a number we're out and then in, Polly, is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, so it's 7 and 20 still 5%. What is 5% currently? What number is 5%?
I think that we could, last year we believed that, I don't think our numbers are bigger this year. I think that they may be a little bit small. I didn't do that math, Polly. We were confident last year that 7 met that criteria.
Okay, just because it says the minimum is not fewer. So
right.
I'm kind of fine keeping, I don't know how everybody feels, how you feel about keeping the same if it does not in fact go below 5%.
And this is a transfer between Enosburg and
No.
or outside of.
It's outside. So for instance, like a kid who lives in Highgate and should be going to this boy under Act 129 can apply to come here.
Okay.
But the money stays in Highgate.
Okay.
And so there's criteria, which you said the criteria you use is basically like they have to provide their own transportation. There has to be room in our building. You can't be. So there is criteria to allow that to happen.
So it's both and on that, Polly. So it is both transfer between Enosburg and Richford and in or out of other schools across the state.
But isn't between Enosburg and Richford, is Act 129 or is it our own policy between in district?
It's 129 because our policy within district is an elementary choice policy.
Because we had Act 129.
Right.
And obviously the money's, that's a little different in the fact that if a Richford.
The same money.
Or vice versa, we would still hold that money, yeah. But
right.
Get out of district, we would not be getting that money.
Right.
And we've had kids petition to come here, you know, they've had a bad experience fitting into another school, and they like the smaller school of Enosburg or Richford. We've had different scenarios where kids have tried to transfer in. Yeah.
So there's a deadline associated with this. It's a March 1st deadline. That's why we need to set these limits each year at your January meeting, because principals, there's a letter that just went out to all the students in both of our communities notifying them of this option, and it's gone out in every other community in Vermont as well. So the next 8-ish weeks, principals will be receiving these choice applications to other schools and communities based on what they receive from their students. So we'll need to make or those applications are due by March 1st, and then we'll need to make decisions and get information back out by, I think it's beginning of April, if I remember right. I'd have to look back.
Principals, have we hit capacity? No. Okay, you get it.
I guess.
But you've never hit up against those numbers.
And what's the rationale for allowing more in? Especially since we're not getting the funding.
The funding for it?
Yeah.
Well, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, sometimes having more students in a decreased population can keep the robustness of the programming. So for instance, you wouldn't necessarily run a class with 5 kids, but you run a class for 10 kids. Kind of that stuff. Wouldn't you say like that's the rationale?
Yeah, there's more course flexibility. I also think, Morgan, maybe I'm wrong, but you get to count them in child count even if you don't count fiscal, right?
You do not count towards equalized pupils.
They don't count.
But they do count towards your ratios, Rachel.
Right, I knew there's
Ratios,
something,
right.
there, right, so your class size ratios and what you're putting up to the state, there are ratios that they do benefit. And not.
I think that, go ahead.
Still gets to keep them and they fractionally, or in terms of your tuition rate, you still have to count them on the come up with the tuition rate that you're sending to my town person.
And, it only works if, like, there are some students who might live on the border of a community, like, we have a student who's going to North Country who wants to play football and he lives on the J border. So he's not far from North Country. Yeah. But there is a student from NBU who I think wants to come to Richford next year because he wants a smaller environment. It only works if you do give and take. And
It's not just to be happy.
Right. Most students want to stay in their own school.
I know in St. Albans we get kids because sometimes parents are community oriented. So it's like, it almost just makes sense, like, you bring your kids with you that way. Yeah, so I think it's just basically, obviously you wouldn't want to take in that amount of kids in direct capacity, but it just bring them to system. But actually having kids in your building supports your system. Yeah.
I'm okay with the way we have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? So moved.
Next slide, Courtney. So as you all know, the legislative session has just begun. Last Tuesday, Wednesday was the first day, was opening session for the legislators. So I think there's a lot that's likely to happen this year. There are several things I know that I'm certainly going to be paying attention to, along with my colleagues at the VSA. I'm quite certain that both the Vermont Principals Association and Vermont School Boards Association have similar interests. I'm certainly going to be looking to the legislature to see what they're going to do in terms of funding the facilities needs of Vermont schools. So we have this massive legislation that was passed that, it is all about PCB testing in our schools, and they have made the threshold for Vermont's PCB limits 3 times more stringent than the EPA. And right now, there's not enough funding that's going to support the findings that they're likely going to have in Vermont schools. So I want to see where they go with the PCB mitigation measures, and as well as the plan for carrying out what they promised they were going to be able to carry out last year. I don't think that they have the right level of vendor support to do what they were tasked with. We're still waiting on the results of the one school that we had that was tested in early September. Also going to be looking at whether or not there's going to be conversation that gains traction in the legislature around school construction aid. I think throughout Vermont, we haven't not had school construction aid since the early 2000s. So there's been a lot of deferred maintenance on buildings throughout the state. So I'll be curious to see if that is something that they bring forward in the legislature. I think one of the things that I'm most interested in is seeing how the legislature prioritizes supporting schools by supporting our local mental health agencies and shoring up the services and supports that are available to our students. I think that you as board members have heard us talk time and again about, you know, the services and the placements that used to be available to our students don't exist anymore. So I'm certainly going to be advocating for them to really attend to the needs of our mental health designated agency more so than schools right now, because we need that community partner to be as healthy as possible so that they can provide us the options that we need to support our students. Another piece that I'm going to be watching for is how the legislature might work to plan forward around contending with the educator workforce shortage. I know that there's interest across the state in doing some work in that area. I know that in the state of Vermont, educators are kind of the number one. I think this came out of the McClure Foundation research potentially. I might have the source wrong, but education is going to be the number one shortage area for Vermont jobs in the next 10 years in the state of Vermont. The other piece that's happening at the state level right now that I'm going to be watching is the Agency of Education has been tasked with creating district quality standards and assurance measures. So I'll be curious where that goes, both of the agency and if there'll be any additional information that the legislature considers related to what they passed previously. I just wanted to give you kind of that tip that those are the things I'm going to be watching for. There'll be other things that come that we're not anticipating that I'll be, you know, talking with you about in future meetings. I think I always want to take this opportunity in our January meetings to encourage you to pay attention to your organization, the Vermont School Boards Association. You're going to start getting regular updates, legislative updates, and it's important for you as board members to have an understanding of what's happening at the state level and how it might impact us and our local schools. So I'd encourage you to be an active member of VSBA, and also there are advocacy ways that you can participate in legislative advocacy yourself as an individual. So please reach out to VSBA, or if you have any questions for Morgan or I know that we're both willing to take on any questions. Anything anybody wants to add about legislative update or any questions? Okay, Courtney. So this is also the month that I typically come to the board and say, you know, I'm going to ask you to make a motion for me to send a letter to the union contemplating a reduction in force. This has been something that is it's an annual standard notification that we've done. This year, I'm actually recommending to boards that you don't send that notification, that given the workforce shortage, I think that it's short-sighted to be sending notification that we're going to reduce our workforce when we're contending with not being able to fill the positions that we need. So unless the board opposes, I recommend that we don't send that letter.
I would agree.
I don't know if you want to spend any more time on that, or how do you want to move forward with the Enosburg Middle School leadership model?
I think didn't we leave it where we kind of tipped you and that you were going to see what that looked like?
Okay, maybe you and I could talk offline. I struggled through that conversation, not really being able to hear.
1 and 3, we liked 1. If in fact, so there were like all these caveats, right? If in fact that you keep it completely separate, right? That the middle school would still have like their point person that you talked about, whether that's student students, sure. Whether it makes more sense to do a high school assistant principal, sure. Does it make sense to merge 2 positions? For instance, the flexible pathways and the lead principal? Like, is there even capacity to do that? If the answer is no, then take it off the list. Right? Isn't that kind of what we talked about?
I think you also asked for a listing of what the flexible academy, pathways academy job description included.
Right.
The administrative piece.
The administrative one, because we said, well, what about that? She has 20 students, and you were like, actually, she does all these other things in the building. Like, so what does that look like? Is there even capacity to do that, or is that off the table? If so, right, then that informs more of our decision. As in, number one looks great.
So is my charge to go away and come back with at your February meeting, either a proposal or two proposals connected to 1 and 3?
Yes.
And are you comfortable waiting that long for me to post a position?
I mean, well, I feel like it's more of a conversation with the people in your buildings. So for instance, what is the impact if it is a dean of students and they can't do some of the administrative function? Is that going to have a more detrimental impact? If so, then we need to do an assistant principal. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like the conversations and the impacts around that need to be more of the people on the ground doing the work. I feel like as the board, we can basically say we support a different model and however best that needs to happen. So do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounded like we all kind of agree that option one sounded good. Definitely keeping the middle school separate and having their own, basically, I thought it was more of an assistant principal role because it sounds like the current principal has more than just middle school principal. So as an assistant principal, having two assistant principals, one primarily in the high school, one primarily in the middle school, but they can still have shared duties. You know, they're still the point person for their respective schools, but they also can, you know, kind of help out where needed. Right. So if you have two assistant principals, under the one team, that's what I thought.
But then you also talked about that you might have somebody who wants to do a leadership role without an administrative license. So that would be a dean of students. So that's why I feel like it needs to be more of a conversation for you and your people. Does that make sense?
So I think that the reason that I put dean of students on there is because I know what the pool of candidates looks like. And we're struggling to find, I've got a principal position open in Sheldon right now, and there are not a lot of candidates with the licensure. So we could shift to an assistant principal if there's someone with the licensure or enough credits that we could get them the provisional endorsement to be an assistant principal. And there also could be people that could have the skills necessary to do the job as a dean of students, and we could set an expectation that we want them to be working towards their licensure, which would make them eligible for the assistant principal model.
So it could go either way.
Yeah. I mean, the only real thing that I'm aware of in statute that the dean of students can't do is discipline, like suspend students. That you need an administrator license to be able to do that. That's the only thing that's coming to my head right now.
What about
Maybe
and supervision?
Right.
say that again, Rachel.
For evaluation and supervision, I believe needs a license.
Right.
I could look into that. I mean, we could advertise for an assistant principal, and we could look at what the candidate pool looks like.
Good.
And then if there are not qualified candidates, we could look at it through the lens of the dean of students.
Yep.
And not advertise for a combined middle school plus value added person? Are you deciding?
Well, so here's the weird part. It's like here, and Rachel,
I'm
you know,
I'm
I
being
am your
selective
fan.
listening.
I know.
So
Like, you are the sun in my sky. And I also know, like, our identities are wrapped up. Right? I totally respect that. But Rachel has been
like financially less than other principals because of it's such a small school. And so if you're,
Wait, you mean, okay, what?
Yes,
Oh, so
yes, my pay wasn't
you're not
equalized
actually
until 2
saving-
years ago.
you're not actually saving money.
but that's what, if you're gonna
Largely.
now offer a pool to a principal,
I see.
and it's gonna be basically what they're gonna be making as the assistant principal with no capacity of reaching a principal salary, because they are gonna be overseeing significantly less responsibility. Not that you didn't oversee significantly less responsibility. But that's kind of the rationale, I guess. Yeah.
So sort of an integrated model with either a dean of students or an associate principal, depending on, you know, the pool. Right? As long as we can be assured, integrated from a 6 to 12 perspective, but not the social integrated for the 6 to 8.
Yes.
Okay, so I think I could advertise for the assistant principal. And then we'll start a process to be able to, we'll get started reviewing those candidates, and I'll put together a timeline and process for all of you. Also can make the decision as we're partway through the process that this isn't getting us what we had hoped. And we could come back to the table in February to look at, is there another model that we want to consider?
I do think, in some reflection, if you lose, I don't think dean of students can evaluate teachers. If you lose evaluative capacity, you drop an additional 20 staff members requiring evaluation onto the 2 existing principals. So I think that's something to be mindful of.
Right.
Not that it's not, but we already are really distributing out the teacher and para evaluation, a full staff of evaluation.
I definitely will make sure that I clarify that piece, Rachel. So I think that if we're going to go in this direction, we'll advertise for assistant principal.
Yeah.
And I think
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I just think most people we could get a provisional for, even if they're not currently licensed, we could get a provisional endorsement for an assistant principal license.
I would just add to what Rachel said in terms of suspending kids, and suspending kid, you have to really know what you're doing. So it's not, you have to know the background, right? So for the high school assistant principal, that would add a chunk of work to her responsibility.
Right.
If she was then, it would make her sort of an approximate overseer of the whole school's discipline. And I honestly do not want to add anything to her plate if possible. So I like the idea of somebody who has, as Lynn said, somebody who maybe doesn't have it yet, but could have a provisional.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yep. And also for consistency's sake, right? So if you have an assistant in the high school, you know, having one in the middle school, so that's a second tier under you. Handling high school, handling this.
The middle, of course, because the middle, this may be quite obvious, but because the middle school is smaller, that person wouldn't just be doing the discipline, or just be doing the teachers. It would be pretty similar. I think pretty similar now.
Yeah.
With a few shifts. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I understand where we're headed. Any further discussion on that, Polly?
No.
Okay. Courtney? I owe you a board monitoring report. I was not able to produce this on Edge Climber. So Mary Ellis is going to help me with this, and I'm going to send you the results via email. I think this is last on my agenda. One of the things that the SU board has charged us with is trying to find a space for an FNESU staff childcare program. And as I'm sure many of you know, that the space is a hot commodity in this community. It's hard to come by. So we do have I'm not sure, have we done RFP yet, Morgan, for alternative program?
Say that again?
For our alternative program, have we done an RFP for the space needs for that yet?
Has gone out, but we don't have bids back.
Okay. So we're currently in the process of trying to find a space for alternative programs within the community. So that being said, if we can find a space, which we believe we will be able to find a space, the Monteith House will no longer be needed to serve as our trail house program. So I think Nate would back me up on this Monteith House has some significant needs in terms of the condition of that building. So one of the wonders we have at the SU level is, would the ER board be interested in doing some sort of partnership with the FNE, with the SU? The SU by statute cannot own property. So one of the wonders we had was, if the Monteith House was no longer there, if we were able to take that building down, would the ER board consider one of two things? One, would you consider purchasing a modular classroom or a building to put in that space to meet the needs of the staff child care center, and then leasing that back to the SU? Or in your design of the Cold Hollow expansion, would the board consider thinking about putting an FNE issued child care center in the space as an offshoot of the Ed Rising program that you currently have, kind of as a lab space for that program? Not that it would be the only site that kids would be assigned to, but it could be one of the multiple sites that kids could be assigned to. Not to be staffed by Cold Hollow, but to be the space to be leased to us.
So, I mean, I can tell you what my gut is, but I don't know if it's right. my first like is the modular classroom idea. I feel like lumping that in to Cold Hollow, although it'll be utilized as Cold Hollow by Cold Hollow students, I still in my head feel like it's separate. And because of that, I don't know if I would want to lump it into that fund. But I could be totally wrong and totally fucked out.
One of the pieces I should share is we're exploring the modular classroom model for Shelburne right now. So we're about to become well-versed in what's out there for options. We have talked with the facilities director, who does think that we could find something size-wise that could meet the needs in a modular type construction.
I feel like I need to see. Could you bring like pictures?
I can pull it up quickly if you want me to, Lynn. I have our slideshow that we made last week.
Polly, are you talking about pictures of a modular classroom or the site?
Yeah, well, no, I know the site I know, and you're right, the Monteith House has some pretty significant.
Yeah.
So like renovating it doesn't make sense.
Right.
But yeah, what does that look like? The old modular classrooms used to be like a tin box. Is that what we're talking
Yeah.
about? Oh, it is. What we're talking about. And I can't even.
There's an opportunity through FEMA to get them for like significantly reduced price or even free. After like, if there's been an emergency or a disaster, they put them up, and then when they're done, they want to get rid of them.
Yeah, like what are we talking?
Lynn, do you want me to share this slideshow?
Yeah, if Polly in the board is interested in seeing it.
Yeah.
The other thing we could do is we could ask for, if it's something you're interested in exploring, we could ask Vern to come back with a site map.
Yeah.
And some of those options.
Oh, so that was just a couple of options that Vern received.
They look very classroomy inside.
They do look very
Yes, yeah.
But I think classroomy, I don't know if I think childcare is that.
There's just a couple of quotes.
Yeah.
So we haven't asked for pictures of a more open space than we asked for classrooms. So I think that's why we have these examples there. But I think if tonight it isn't to get you to commit, but to just see if there's any interest in exploring this at all. And if there is, I certainly could have Vern, while he's working on the Sheldon options, also be looking at the Enosburg site and bringing back some ideas for there.
And are you still looking for other sites in the process? Or is this just if we can't find another site?
To be honest with you, we are focused on the alternative program first. And when we do the RFP for that, I mean, we just thought we would extend this as a, let's see if there's interest at the ER board level first. But it doesn't mean that we couldn't go out to the community and do kind of an RFP process for childcare. I know Morgan's been pretty working more closely with a community group around childcare than I have. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Morgan.
No, there's a group in town that is looking for childcare, but it would be a different model than what we're exploring.
Right.
Obviously, if anybody can find 20 childcare seats in this town, it's going to help.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be specific to the retention strategy that we got.
Right, because we want childcare just for employees.
I think the ideal situation is that when we get these bids back for the alternative programs, that there are, 4 people bidding different spaces, and we pick one for that, and then we can go back to those other 3 and say, hey, what about your space for this option?
Yeah, so
My sense is that we're not going to get 4 points bidding, so for that it's not there.
Yeah, my initial thought is modular being sort of a more temporary location. What would the delta be between buying a modular building versus building that one floor center that's more permanent?
I was just thinking expense, but maybe, so again, yeah, I guess I need numbers, like maybe it's a wash, maybe by the time you do all the groundwork and everything, and utilizing potentially cold follow to build something, maybe it's not that different. Yeah.
That's kind of exactly where we're going in the discussion in Sheldon. And one of the things that they're exploring right now is a temporary lease of a modular classroom and having further discussions about construction, like doing a stick built. But I think the prices, I think, Morgan, what we got at the end of that meeting was the per square foot price for new construction was a little higher than what we were anticipating for commercial space.
Yeah, I think it was still significantly less expensive for the modular, but
yeah. So I think we've planted the seed. We just really wanted you to think about, is that an option you would consider down the road? Certainly not down the road tomorrow, but know that that's one of our recruitment and retention strategies that we're hoping we can move forward with, and we'll keep looking within the community. But if we hit a crossroad, we may come back and ask the board again if there's an interest in partnering with us.
Okay.
And that is all I have except that executive session.
Okay. That brings us to Kelly.
All information.
Okay. Any like
I think, of course, we're just coming back from
Right.
break, so I'm kind of getting back into things, but we did do our know
okay.
that our super excited.
And STAR assessment math, right?
It was for.
Over reading.
It's STAR.
It's both.
It is both.
Like in kindergarten, it's just.
Okay.
And they, were just super excited by course we did. And the structures that we put in place. Targets and vendors. Yeah.
Next we have Beth. All informational. Okay. So for a highlight, I'll just say that we've had a lot of positive feedback lately around our culture and environment. I've had 2 NCS best workers leave. They're being replaced and they both said to me what a pleasure it has been to work in our school.